Hey. Hi, everyone. Hey, Noemie.
Hey, Jess, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. Excited that we get to be doing this.
Let's have a bit of a discussion about discussion, which is cool.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just kick us off by saying that my name is Jess Layton, and I'm broadcasting, or I'm here live speaking from Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm.
Yeah, cool. And I'm broadcasting or, calling in from Wajak country in the southwest of WA, in Bulu or Perth. And, Jess and I both acknowledge thousands of years of tradition and culture that's been practiced across this continent. And we're just both so lucky and humbled to be able to live in the beautiful dispersed places that we do. So, thanks to everyone for calling in, and also that this land has never been ceded, sovereignty has never been ceded. Yeah,
Australia was and always has been Aboriginal land, and always will be. Sort of to give some. Oh, sorry.
We'll just invite anyone who's here to just chuck in where you're listening in from, and we'll get a sense of where everyone's at.
Yeah, everyone, if you're feeling keen for it, chuck in where what country you're tuning in from, which would be pretty cool in the chat. Also, feel free to send some questions and comments or in the chat, whatever options available to you. We're happy to answer direct questions about anything to do with dialogue or really anything to do with both our practices. Speaking of, Noemie is a queer Jewish performer maker, writer, dramaturg, and teaching artist based on Wajak Noongar country in Western Australia. Her work is driven by a deep belief in the social role of art and engaging with sites and histories where ecological crisis, queer culture, and community occur. Most importantly, though, she also has 5 chickens.
Yes, very important. And Jess invented writing, the airplane, and the internet. He was also the first person to reach the North Pole. She unpacks queerness, fandom, and pop culture in her work, and you can find him online at A Geek with a Hat. I highly recommend the Instagram.
Oh, thank you. I guess we can just really dive into it. The sort of cool thing about talking about dialogue whilst talking about dialogue is that everyone can hear all our ums and our ahs that aren't necessarily reflected in, when we write dialogue in fiction or in theatre.
Totally.
That, what sort of things do you write personally, Noemie? What's your practice as a writer, and how does dialogue play into that?
Yeah, totally. So I kind of work across theatre and performance and poetry as a performance maker and a writer, and recently more as a dramaturg and a poet. And I guess the way dialogue fits into that is when I'm thinking about performance and theatre, I'm always thinking about what's the world that the audience is being invited into, and how can we kind of create that world in a really multifaceted way and kind of convey the scope of this through sound and lighting and text and all of these ingredients kind of being a part of it. And I guess dialogue can say so much about the beings who are in the world, but it can also just really tell the tone of the kind of set the tone of the piece. So and I guess also with poetry, I'm kind of experimenting with how people are how the it's sort of being filtered through, people's voices are being filtered through the text, I guess. Yeah. How about you? What kind of stuff do you write, and how does dialogue fit into that?
I'm probably a bit more traditional when we think about writing dialogue. I am primarily a fiction and a non-fiction writer. So I tend to write a lot of fan fiction as well, just, as an escape from the literary industry, and it's a fun practice. Most of my fiction is sci-fi or spec fic, and it's all generally YA. So there is, I would say, a lot of dialogue that goes into YA to make it pop, to make it what it is. It's funny because dialogue is actually my favorite thing to write in fiction. Well, the sort of way I go about approaching dialogue is that when I think of a scene, I actually write all the dialogue out first. And then have fill in the gaps with description and action and things. That tends to be where my mind goes to first. And but dialogue is actually something that didn't really come to me naturally as a writer. It was something I had to really work at and pay extra attention to get it to a place where I think I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, actually similar for me. I found the way that it was being taught to me was quite alienating, and so it took me a while to actually be like, oh, what I'm doing is that I'm just calling it a different name.
Exactly.
Or I'm approaching a different way. So it is not always an easy thing, or I guess writing's hard.
Writing is hard, but
conclusion end event.
That's the end. That's all the tips we have for you. No, we will get into some tips and some practices that we think will benefit people wanting to enhance their dialogue or to really zone in on their dialogue a little bit later in the chat. But sort of feeding into that idea of what you said, that it felt alienating, the way perhaps courses or universities or guides online sort of talked about writing dialogue. I found writing dialogue is that balance between just that gut feeling of hearing something and being like, yeah, that's a good line, or that fits, and also the technical aspect of what the function of dialogue is in a piece.
Yeah, totally. I feel
off track.
Sorry?
This is probably getting a little off track to what we sort of organized our chat at this point, but that's the nature of dialogue.
Yeah, totally. And I think for me, I really relate when I have to sort of hear plays, to hear them out loud, to feel what the rhythm is and all that kind of stuff. And something you just said then made me think of that. What you
oh god. It goes in one ear and out the other for me.
Yeah. Well, just this thing that it's an active process, I guess, of listening and paying attention to the world and to the people around you, and how they have, how they enter into conversations with other people, and what they don't say, what often is missing beneath what people are saying. So I guess just something that comes to mind a lot is how, if you want to write, I guess, theatre or just write, I often think about just listening.
So much of writing dialogue is listening. You hear those stories, or I also did this in university when I studied creative writing. That's my degree. I did this activity in university where we went onto a tram, just in a packed, loaded tram, and the whole exercise was just to be writing down snippets of conversation we heard in a really creepy way. Now that I think about it, we could have been talking about anything. I'm just there ooh, you broke up with your boyfriend. But that was really useful for trying to craft story afterwards. We took all that dialogue back into our tutorial room and tried to make a scene out of the snippets of dialogue we had gathered from people, and trying to craft stories and characters around what we heard and just what we had experienced in the moment. What practices have you sort of done to help with your dialogue?
Yeah. Well, actually, I've done something kind of similar to that, which is some teacher called it overheard conversations. And it was writing down what you were hearing, but then sort of going through a process of editing, and each time heightening the sort of situation, or making it more extreme or explicit, and kind of just tweaking at this what you'd heard, and really upping it. which I find really interesting, to kind of take something that is a sort of real life thing and then like slowly pull it apart and then watch like the like those steps. Like I'm kind of really fascinated by process. Like I think that's sort of why I am like interested in dramaturgy, because I'm like really interested in like hearing about like how people are doing things and like why, which is sort of off topic, but
no, not at all.
Yeah. And then another thing I think is kind of important is like editing, because like I had a class earlier, maybe last week, with amazing playwright Kamara Bell Wykes, who everyone should totally check out if you don't know who she is. And she was talking about how in her work, it's like how efficient can she be with her dialogue. It's like her plays, it's like quite sparse sometimes. So she's just like trying to whittle it down as much as she can, and like with the amount of like really using things really efficiently, which is like not everyone's vibe, but it's so obvious in her writing how like how much she's been really like, okay, I'm doing, really intentional. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of intentionality, I think, to crafting great dialogue. You can't have, not a single word on the page can be an afterthought. Every sort of sentence, every or you put in there, not a lot, hopefully, but every sort of part of the dialogue you put on the page needs to have a meaning behind it. The way I sort of craft my dialogue is that all of my dialogue should either reveal more about the character saying it, or it should forward the plot. And the best dialogue, in my opinion, does both at the exact same time. So sort of speaking to what you just said then, the one piece of advice I give to like every writer at any of these events and things like that is mostly writing is actually rewriting. It's coming back, like you said, and peeling back the layers of what you've already written and tweaking and adjusting and going back in there with a fine-tooth comb or a magnifying glass, like some old 90s kids cartoon guy. We're speaking about dialogue in a very like broad manner, but sort of let's hone in a little bit more. What makes good dialogue? What is good dialogue, and what is bad dialogue, do you reckon?
I mean, I don't know. I tend, like, I'm going to be pretty honest and like also speak about my biases and kind of positionality, in that I as a theatre maker, I probably sit on the more like experimental end of, the mainstream. And so I actually tend to think about, in my process, character and dialogue and plot sort of towards the end of not towards the end, but I think we put so much emphasis in like, let's say like Western theatre or on these like really linear processes. And I think that's sometimes to the detriment of like thinking about the whole world as like in a holistic way, and kind of the relationships between the place you're writing from, the place in the actual script or world, the the place the audience is in, like it's and everything comes down to this kind of Freudian psychology, which also goes back to like where acting theory came from, which is like fine, but it's I just tend to think like that's sort of how we've been taught that something is working or not. And I think that something can kind of whatever you're doing, if like anything can be good, kind of is what I'm trying to say. Not anything, but I just think I think like there are like a lot of questions to kind of unpack around the values that we place on what might be good or not. And I'm going to circle this back to,
it's coming around.
It's coming around. Yeah. gonna finish this little rant against my rant against white man theatre, mostly, is gonna come back to like, what are you trying to say? What are you doing? Kind of like, if I'm working with a writer as a dramaturg, I'll often be like, okay, like what is it, you know? And then like, what is it really? And like, then like, why are you doing it? And then like try serving like looking at the content of the work and the form of it. And if those things are in dialogue, then then I think then you're in a great place. And I also am a big fan of like working from your instincts. So like we can smell our own poo. You know, like if you're creating, like I think you can kind of tell like, oh, this bit's not working, it's a bit clunky. So I often like I'm working with a playwright at the moment, and it's like, she's like, oh, I don't know if I like should do this. And I was like, well, do you want to write the scene like this? Do you think this is what the characters want to do? And she was like, yeah. And then I was like, well, then like follow that instinct, because your body is obviously telling you to do something, you know, like your subconscious. Yeah, over to you.
That internal dialogue, that internal voice.
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of intelligence in like our subconscious, and I'm a big fan of like, you know, sometimes it's like great to like intellectualize like, oh, this character is doing this because da 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 da, but also it's like it has to happen because I just know it is also a valid reason. But you know, that's maybe contentious, and other people might think that's bullshit. I mean, you know, wrong.
Yeah, drink that
tea.
Yeah, sips tea. I only have water and a cat that is currently on my notes. Sort of what you spoke to there was really interesting, that you said that you're talking all about the intentionality of it. And I think, and that gut voice, which it's framing that in a way that we can use to craft good dialogue, is that you should know why your characters are saying what they're saying, and more importantly, what they're not saying, and trying and beneath that, finding the layers that you can sort of build upon to create things like subtext, omission. Those are the things about dialogue that people, when we see them, we all have that inner being, because we all talk and we're all in dialogue all the time, whether it's online or IRL or whatever. We have that instinct for when we know that something sounds off in dialogue, because that's the main thing we all do in life all the time.
Yeah.
And to replicate that in fiction is a matter of trying to add those layers that you often get in real life. Gestures. So have your characters do hand gestures as they talk.
Yeah.
My tip.
Because it's like kind of differentiating what someone wants and what someone needs, and you know, maybe when they're lying to get what they want, and that sometimes what someone is saying that they want is not what a character needs, or those kinds of things. So I guess that's also been useful for me, is like just planning out, okay, this you know, this scene or this character is trying to get this thing, but they're going about it in this other way. They're using a different tactic. So yeah.
And it's just all, I think we're beating this point in people's heads, but it really is important to know that like dialogue reveals character. That's the whole purpose of it. Well, one of the many purposes of it in fiction is to reveal character, and that all comes down to simple things like they're just saying what they like, what they talk about, how they talk about it, what they're not talking about or what they're hiding, and what they refuse to talk about in general, and just the word choice and diction that you would use in those situations all convey character. One thing that is probably controversial in a lot of writing spheres is exposition through dialogue, which a lot of people have a really hard and fast opinion, being like, no exposition in dialogue. And for those watching who don't know what exposition is, it's information about the world you're working in. So if it was a fiction piece, it's someone walking up to their sister and being like, hello, sister, my sister, my older sister, hello. Have you done that thing that we already know that you do every Tuesday? It's not Tuesday, I realize, it's Sunday. So a lot of writers have a hard and fast rule of putting no exposition in their dialogue. I'm wondering, where do you stand on that point? Do you have a stand?
Yeah, like I think it kind of goes back to like what you're trying to do with the work. Like I've probably read some or experienced some shows where I think that's kind of worked well, like a sort of narration. It's kind of fitted the thing that the writer or the theatre makers are going for, which is like breaking the fourth wall or like being able to talk to the audience about like, this is what we're doing. And you know, there's some really amazing theatre companies who've done that, like Forced Entertainment or like Lally Katz is an Australian playwright who always inserts herself into her own plays. So it's like, and she's sort of guiding the audience through it the whole time. She's saying, okay, now I'm going to this place. And I think that like works for her. And I think it goes back to, but I think this may be where like written like fiction and non-fiction, maybe, which is more your world, and I'd say like live or like staged work might differ, because I'm just thinking back to like, reading a book and having like pages and pages of like exposition is probably not that exciting, but maybe
like Game of Thrones, for example, there's the characters who like do the whole history of like the world, and it's people, and they're talking about boulders or whatever it is.
So I don't have a firm stance. I think just set your figure out what you're trying to do with your work is kind of the and then you'll create your own kind of rules for what that work needs. Because like if you're writing a pop song, maybe it's different from writing a piece of classical music, and so you're kind of using the conventions as you need them, but you don't have to be tied to one, I guess is what I'm saying. But you made a point before about like how dialogue, like it was like conveys like all these things about character, and I was just thinking about like it also conveys like their culture, their background, their people's class, all these kinds of things like accents.
The expositional information that can be used so well to convey.
Yeah, like just the rhythm of how someone speaks can say so much about like where they're from or even like someone's worldview or where they live. And
the way
I'm kind of fascinated. Yeah, sorry.
The way they say hello to someone can convey that relationship, that character has a relationship with that person, whether they're like, oh, hi, or like, hi, I love you.
And their relationship to like language and to power, because I guess like like language is not a neutral or like an equal, like people's access to language is not neutral or equal, I guess. And so the way that people use language also reveals all these kinds of subtexty things that then you don't have to say in exposition, I guess.
And it's ever evolving too, which is what I love about language. And like in YA specifically, sometimes you come across a YA book where someone's tried to like use dab or like blink or lol, and they're like a 30-year-old writer who's 30s, I'm 25 now, so I'm realizing 30 is not actually that old. But they're probably like a much older writer than the teens they're writing, and you can sort of pick up on that, and you're like, that's our word. You don't get to use that word.
Like properly doing the research about the people the voices you're trying to channel, or whether you should be channeling them at all, I guess.
Definitely. Like, not to spill the tea on the chat, but there's there's an excerpt of J.K. Rowling's latest book that she publishes under her pseudonym going around at the moment, and it's like, like it's written like that.
Right.
It's written like how she thinks like a Cockney British accent sounds. And there's some instances where that can work really well with fiction, where you are conveying the character and things like class or background or like just experience and really casual colloquialism. So like g'day, I use g'day a lot in real life, and I also use it in my fiction, and people know Australian. But you can go too far where it actually becomes, with dialogue, it needs, first and foremost, it needs to be easily readable in terms of fiction or non-fiction. And with theatre, I'm sure it needs to be listenable and legible for the reader. If you've got someone who's and like every other word has like triple not pronouns, that'd be cool. I have two, so that's awesome. If every word has like another dozen vowels when they're just trying to replicate the sound of something, it can make for an uncomfortable reading experience. So it's a balance to be struck for writers writing dialogue, to do realistic dialogue, but don't have it too realistic where every second word is or or like. I say like a lot, but if I actually wrote down like one of my characters, I just did it then, one of my characters saying like after every third or fourth or second word, it becomes a slog to read. It actually takes the reader further out of the fiction than if you had just been a bit more restrained with the likes and the ums and the ahs and the which I also do a lot of, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I think it can kind of go back to what your intention is with the work, because sometimes an artist's intention is to make people uncomfortable and or to disrupt some a notion of all kinds of things. So, and one way of doing that might be through language. So like there's this cool theatre maker, Rosalind Odes, who I think works mostly from Sydney, and she works with, like, she interviews people, like lots and lots of people for all of her shows, and then she's kind of made this thing called headphone verbatim, which is like all of these recorded conversations. She'll get actors to inhabit those conversations by wearing headphones and then speaking what they hear exactly as they're hearing them. So all the ums and all the ahs and everything. And it has this strange effect of, for example, you're hearing like an 80-year-old woman's voice come out of an 18-year-old, like that's one of her shows, and vice versa. And you kind of, as an audience, you're watching and experiencing, and then that is like there's a disjunct between the voice you're hearing and the way that they're speaking, and so you're kind of really invested in that, in the continuation. And so that's just to say that, like, if what you want to do is to kind of break those forms, then there are always strategies, there are always ways you can do that. That's all I'll say.
It's so interesting because I think the way we approach our craft is not only because we work in different forms, obviously, but by nature of the forms we work in, we're a fair bit more experimental and boundary pushing than I necessarily am. I'm also traditional in terms of writing my fiction and my non-fiction. Not to say that fiction and non-fiction can't be more experimental. There's amazing experimental pieces out there in the world, and a lot I've actually really enjoyed. But it's just interesting how we both approach dialogue. We have a lot of the same opinions about it.
Yeah.
But we've gone into quite in depth.
Yeah. And I think that's so great to actually, we don't spend a lot of time talking about process. And so it's so great to hear like your approach, because it's like we spend a lot of time talking about people's finished products, like, oh, I'll read your book or I'll read your script or whatever. but actually being like, how did you even get to that? Is that your book?
It's an anthology I was published in recently, Underdog Lover's Way Stories. I brought that because I'm hoping at some point, perhaps the end of our little talk, we can both do a quick reading of some of our dialogue to sort of give an idea. So people can judge for themselves whether we're talking a lot of poopy, as some might say, or we know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's a good time sort of now. We've sort of really dug deep into a lot of things. Let's talk about some tips for writers who are wanting to improve their dialogue or to experiment with their dialogue. What are your thoughts on when we come to that?
Yeah, I'd say listen to the world. Yeah, especially listen to people who speak differently to you and observe what they're saying, why they're saying it.
And record them and then go back later at your desk and write out what the recording is. Yeah, transcribe it. Don't tell anyone to do that though, because it is a bit creepy.
Yeah, read other people's work that you really connect with. And get in touch with other writers whose work you admire if they're alive. Lots of writers. Not in sorry, it's a bit morbid, but it wasn't meant to be. It was
a Ouija board, have a seance and summon.
Yeah, Shakespeare.
What do you mean by this?
Yeah, and I think what other little tips? Sometimes with character, it's I enjoy writing 50 things I know about that character, and then putting people, or sometimes I write animals, so putting people or whoever you're writing in different scenarios and seeing how they deal with it. Yeah. What do you think?
For me, the main thing is, particularly when writing fiction, but this goes for any of your writing, read it out loud after having written it, or even during read it out loud.
Yeah, and get other people to read it to you.
Exactly. Have people read it to you, read it to them.
Really scary.
If you're a loner like me, usually computers have a text to voice function, like Word or Pages. You can highlight your text and actually get the computer to recite it to you. It does it in a very monotone voice, but it's a pretty good exercise. Some things that also work for me when writing dialogue is, like I said, don't be 100% realistic. I always overwrite my dialogue. I put a lot of ums, ahs, and spaces and ellipses, the 3 dots and the em dash. I'm all about characters cutting each other off as they speak.
Oh, so, yeah, I love that.
Oh, yeah, getting a good rapport going. So what helps me with that is knowing when the page is a bit too busy and it looks too busy, having a lot of that stuff going on the one page. I sort of know that when I go to read that out loud, it's going to be quite laborious activity for any reader to sort of connect the dots through.
Yeah.
And a big tip for me is to break up your dialogue with action. Because also, not only is it just what the characters aren't saying that matters. Are you writing down my tips? That's so cute.
I'm just writing down a thought that you just inspired in me.
Yes, that's what we're here. That's what dialogue's all about. Before I interrupted myself, like I do with all my characters, you can see why I write characters interrupting themselves and other people, because I do it to myself. But breaking up your dialogue with action, it helps to add it adds pace to a piece, and also it's realistic, because when two people are talking, unless you're in a situation like we are at our desks facing a webcam, you're not just standing still and talking. You're, walking to class. You're picking up something. You're picking your nose. I don't know who does that. But doing all sorts of things, and it can even, and the actions matched with dialogue can be really effective. Oh my God, my cat's just stood up. He's been here the whole time. The thoughts of a character and their actions can enhance dialogue all in the one scene, create a moment that's really visually appealing for readers.
Yeah.
And sort of just going into briefly sort of what we've already covered is to not info dump in your writing. Really interrogate the logic of the dialogue that you're writing. So if your character is sort of speaking to their mother, they're not going to constantly being like, my mother, you're my mother, or saying things that their mother would already know. It might be useful for the reader, like conveying that information to the reader, but it's not the effective way to do that, and it's not consistent with the character. It happens a lot. Like, I think I've used this example already before in this chat, but it happens a lot in like TV shows when characters are talking to their siblings, and you can tell they're not siblings because no one talks to their siblings like my brother or like says their name. You're going to be like, hey, butthead, you know, or like, mum's mistake. You know, you say things to your siblings in a different way than you speak to other people. So I guess just like considering relationships between characters and relationships to environment. You're going to speak differently when you're in a classroom, trying to avoid the teacher's notice than when you're out at lunchtime, you know, playing Foursquare.
Totally.
I miss Foursquare.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point. Like thinking about all of the influences, not just the relationships that influence what someone says, but also like where they are and why they're there. Like, you know, if you're in court, it's different to if you're in the doctors or whatever.
Is it different?
Yeah, maybe that was a bad example. But like the way the kind of thing people would be speaking about. Yeah, that's something you said. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You were talking about action. Yeah, I think that's really important in like dramatic writing. Is like, it's actually like the dialogue is a function of like what they're doing to each other or doing to themselves. So, like what's the like active, like with the when someone's speaking, like what are they actively kind of like doing or trying to get, or you know, that's like the energy, I guess, like might drive a scene is like what they're trying to do or what they really need or want, or
it's that tension.
Not always. Yeah.
There's a tension in dialogue that, I mean, I think in almost all fiction, regardless of form, tension is born and developed and resolved through dialogue, because that like tension between characters and between people and between situations is what most fiction, I'm not going to say all fiction, but most fiction is about. So dialogue is a great way to relieve and resolve and to pitch and heighten all the tension in the story, which is really cool.
Yeah, and then when you were talking about like visually appealing moments, that just made me think about thinking about if you are writing for like for stage or like I guess even film or TV, like thinking about what all the other influences might be on the action. So like thinking about stage directions and light and sound and you know, movement and spatial relationships. Like I was talking to this writer last week about like Lachlan Philpott. He's like amazing playwright. Oh my gosh, he's so great. History of queer theatre in Australia. I love that man. But this, there's this exercise he gets writers to do with like little animal figurines and like thinking about their like spatial relationships as you're writing scenes or things like that. Think about space. That's my point.
The final
space.
Think about space and think about the fact that there might be alien life on Venus or in the atmosphere of surrounding Venus. That's how
true. We're so small. We're so small.
You spoke a little earlier about influencers, so I'm wondering who is influencing your dialogue or your writing practice? Who are some really cool writers or dramaturgs or theatre producers or anyone who's writing or creating dialogue that you recommend our listeners check out?
Yeah, totally. Think like Lachlan Philpott here in Australia, Patricia Cornelius, Nakia Louie. I'm like, really in love with Sarah Kane's work, but that's probably like, I'd say like a 16 plus kind of range, 16 years plus. But
everyone else cover your ears.
But like if you read her plays kind of thing, but it's, she's amazing, really amazing. Who else? Duncan Macmillan is a UK playwright. I think lots of people are doing really cool things. And Alice Birch is another of my favorites. In terms of like theatre writers. I mean, I think again, I'll just state my position in like those are like writers who are kind of experimenting with form and dialogue and character and plot and the sort of limits and blurring the boundaries between things. For example, if I've had playwriting teachers who'll be like, David Mamet is like a really great dialogue writer. And like, that's probably true to a point, but he's also a misogynist. So that's why it's like, probably don't go there. Yeah. Even though like, very like great tension in that dialogue. Like, love that.
The internet. Wait, we can't say it. Find a PDF at your local library on the internet.
Yeah. And like, it depends. Like if you're looking for like, more like realist writing, there's like heaps of contemporary realist playwrights like Van Badham in Australia, and I guess more and then you can go back to more like classical writers, but and those are just some of my favorites. So I guess find what makes your heart sing.
Oh,
yeah,
that's cute. I would say
I feel like for a long time I felt like, I can't, like I'm not a writer for theatre because I can't like do all these things that these people I'm meant to really admire do. But it's just until I actually discovered or, came across more female writers and queer writers and writers from different cultural backgrounds, then that's when I read their work, I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, there are like, it's not like I'm shit at this. I mean, I'm bad at this. Gosh, sorry. I'm just going to also I think we have to be honest, because why are we here if we're not honest, right? I was almost late to this because I forgot that there's daylight savings, and so it's 3-hour time difference with WA, not 2. So I'm a bit frazzled.
That's what we'll blame it. Potty mouth.
Yeah, it's all daylight savings' fault. But I do excuse my language. Over to you.
I'm glad you asked. I really love dialogue, I pulled out some of my fave dialogue writers, even though they write things other than dialogue. So I really like Siobhan Plaza's work. So I'm going to be a beauty tuber. I'm going to do the hand thing. Ooh. Like Siobhan has a really great way of speaking to what I said about before, that tension between characters and relationships conveyed through dialogue. A lot of, in particular, Tin Heart is about what's not said. Some people who are watching may be familiar with Will Kostakis, Sidekick, for example, beauty tuber hand. You can buy this for $19.99. No, I don't know. Will Kostakis is another good writer in terms of writing humor and pacing and tone. So if you're looking to sort of beef up that skill, I recommend checking out Will Kostakis' work. One of my favorite graphic artists is Tilly Walden. Ooh, hand. Are you listening? She does incredible work. I would love to show you like every single piece of hers, but hers is really good with what's not said as well. Like you can see in terms of comics, there's only one panel that has any dialogue. It's so atmospheric, and it's and since comics are like almost wholly in terms of written content are dialogue and conversation, so that's a really good place to go to, comics and graphic novels, if you want to analyze dialogue without the distraction of, you know, prose and descriptions and stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And last one is mostly just because I'm a bit of a fan. Rick Riordan has really fun dialogue that's just fun to read and engaging. It's energetic on the page, so it really things can move really fast. And I think that's a benefit of reading works by middle grade and young adult authors in that pacing is a key part of YA fiction, in that you're writing for younger readers, so you've got to keep the pace up, you've got to keep the tension pretty taut all the way through. There's not really many, you know, languishing moments, which if you are interested in writing dialogue that sort of hits hard and moves and does a lot in a little space, YA fiction is a good place to sort of go to. Resources that you recommend for people who are wanting to boost up their dialogue skills?
Just
stuff recommended.
Just something like you were saying before, like because you were talking about like when people are writing like comedy and I think that's a really important point about like when you're writing like comedy and stuff, like thinking about pacing and like comic timing and and just like dialogue's not just like what people are saying, but like like you were saying, pace and rhythm and all those things can get across so much, because just like the way that the rhythms and cadences of people's voice, especially like TV and theatre and stuff. Resources. I'm a big fan of this really great essay called it's called EF's Visit to a Small Planet, and it's called Some Questions to Ask a Play. I wish I was prepared and I could just like hold up a sign and then you could all write it down. EF's Visit to a Small Planet, Some Questions to Ask a Play.
I'm happy to like, I've got my social media handle in my thing. If anyone has questions and stuff, I'm happy to find
me too. I will write my social media handle. Mine is by Gup Chukmum. But yeah, that's a really great resource. Another one is just gonna get it up real quick. It's called 36 Assumptions About Writing Plays by Jose Rivera is really great. And I don't know, I think like we just have access to so much really great content like now. So something that was handy for me still is like just listening to podcasts by writers like Simon Stevens at like the National Theatre in the UK. Does like a really great podcast, talks to all these different playwrights. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike. Everyone. Claps for the National Young Writers Festival team who are doing all the things.
I was doing them ironically, and now I'm more serious about tapping. It's the worst.
Yeah, oh good. And I think that's probably the ones that come to mind at the moment. But there's also some really great resources on australianplays.org. There's a really good resource on Australian Theatre for Young People. They have a whole bunch of free resources for writers and all these essays written by really great Australian playwrights. One of them is about writing dialogue, and I think that's by Ross Mueller. So yeah, very awesome resource. I go on there like every few months. I'm just like, I wonder if anyone's written some like new essay, and I'm just like, check it out. Where would you kind of direct people?
I mean, traditionally, there's a couple of books I really recommend, sort of speaking to the fact that you don't, if you're, say for me, writing fiction, I don't necessarily always have to be reading resources and things that have to do with fiction. Like I've just written down some of the resources you recommended, because I think as writers, we can take inspiration and our practice from anywhere. So I'm really keen to look into, like, I can use those resources for that you recommended for theatre specifically, but you can turn that into content for your writing. You can learn from that just as much as any other thing. So one of the example of that, apart from what you've just shared, because I'm definitely looking them up, is this book on script writing called Story by It's all about script writing, but you can see all the highlighting and dog-earing I've done. It actually really helped me a lot with my writing when I was in uni and I was studying creative writing. I was doing all these different classes. I didn't do any script writing classes, but I did buy that script writing book, and it really helped a lot with my writing. Some others are quite well known. Stephen King's On Writing. I mean, I'm not the hugest Stephen King fan, but he has some good advice.
Yeah,
you take what you can. And just Bird by Bird is also quite good by Anne Lamont.
Yeah, that is a really beautiful book.
Yeah, which is really good. But that's not terribly accessible. I mean, books, please support your indie bookstores and buy from them. But books can be sometimes expensive. So what I turn to most of all is actually YouTube. I follow a lot of YouTube writing and writing analysis channels, and I've got a few here for people who might be interested. I'll just read the names out and give you a brief summary of sort of what they do. And you can look them up on YouTube, and they're fabulous. I love YouTube. So Now You See It analyzes scenes from scripts, like scenes from films and TV shows, and sort of goes into how to craft character and things like what we're talking about now, dialogue and things. Just Right is really good specifically for writing. Again, a lot of it has to do with scripts and things, but they do talk about books and they do talk about fiction and nonfiction and things. One of my favorites is Lessons from the Screenplay. They actually they really do really amazing deep dives into movies and scripts and things that, as I said, you can take all these resources and things and apply them still to your own work. A really recent sort of one analyzing the character circle, or Dan Harmon's character circle, which is otherwise known as the hero's journey, which talks about how to create character-driven plots. They also have a lot of these cover dialogue in various different ways, analyzing specific scenes or analyzing whole movies or whole scripts. And another one is Savage Books, who is a really awesome writer of color who brings his experience as a writer of color into his analysis of a writer's work and scripts and screens and any sort of literary content you can imagine. I could go forever and recommend so many channels. Totally. Because I binge YouTube all the time and I freaking love it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's such a good point where you're saying about like there are so many places you can go to that aren't related just to your form. Like, I'm like super inspired by, like, my partner's a composer and I'm always just like stealing stuff from what they're doing, like inspiration from what musicians are doing, or like I live with a visual artist and I'm always like, okay, cool, what's like, and I'm learning so much from how other people are working. So I think that's a really great point.
In the same way, you can be a bowerbird of like picking up snippets of dialogue, or oftentimes when I'm talking to friends and they say something funny, I'm like, I'm taking and using that, and I write down that funny thing they said, and it ends up in like a short story or like a anecdote or something I'll write for an article or something later. In the same way you do that with dialogue, you can do that with any literary form. You can learn so much from analyzing, like you said, music and composers, and bring that into your work, or even like lyrics and stuff for poetry and all those sorts of things. I highly recommend just reading widely, and reading in the sense of not just book reading, but reading in the sense of consuming things. Become like me, watch everything on Netflix and watch everything on Stan and watch everything on YouTube and build a little nest built of all these things.
And like read actively, like kind of critically, or like questioning what you're reading. And I think like something you said before, like I had like when what you're reading or what you're watching or whatever, like just looking at it and seeing like you know, how many female writers are there here, or how many writers of color, and you know, just kind of having that critical gaze, not just on the work you're reading, but also like what like who you're reading, and because I think sometimes like like I'll look at my bookshelf and I'll be like, you know, this is what, like, and it'll also point to like something that is going wrong in my writing actually, is like I'm not like, you know, kind of consuming or having my mind opened to lots of different points of view. So like just also like just being honest with yourself of like, and also that like we're always just like learning more and more and more. I'm
constantly learning,
never finished kind of.
Speaking to that, just look for the gaps in what you're consuming and what you're reading, and actively seek out and support those creators, but also it supports yourself by just widening all the experiences and the viewpoints you can consume. I think we're pretty much out of time. Wow, we really went on a bit of a gap.
Yeah, we can really talk.
I'm sure, I hope everyone knows that if you have any questions or want to discuss further, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but we've both got our IG handles up, our Instagram handles, so people feel free to drop us a chat. Does anyone have any questions perhaps before we zoom out of here and I make a cup of tea?
And I mean, I don't mind if people email me either, because I'm a bit more responsive via email, which is just Noemie, my first name, .hk@gmail.com.
That's a good email handle. I put too many
but yeah, I would love to, if people have questions.
If not, I guess, did you still want to do your reading? Or did we feel like we're just kind of cool and people can check out? Where can people check out your work?
They can go to my website, which is not very good, but there is some writing on there. I just need to update it. It's just noemiehk.com. Or that's probably a good place. Yeah, and then some other stuff. That's the thing with making performance in a pandemic. It's like gotta like figure it all out again.
That's always fun.
But yeah, I've got heaps of stuff on my website, and I've also got some other work that hopefully will be coming out soon.
Exciting. As for me, you can just type Jess Layton, Layton, into Google. I have discovered I have an excellent SEO. And you can find most of my work that way.
Actually, good point.
Yeah,
I think you can.
Crazy, like I love it.
I think you can maybe do that with my name, because it's no one else. My name doesn't have a good.
It's so great when you've got a name that stands out. But always you can find my stuff at A Geek with a Hat. I'm pretty self-promotional, I must admit, on mostly on Instagram and Twitter. I don't really do much else social media wise. And you can pick up Underdog, Love Us Way.
Congratulations.
Which is filled with, thank you. It was, God, it's been a year since it's been out, and I'm like, oh my God. Which is filled with a lot of other emerging creators in the YA space here in Australia, publishing their short stories, and I really enjoy every story in there, particularly my own. So, thanks so much Noemie, for chatting with me today. Thanks so much to National Young Writers Festival for having us. This has been a bit of a good yarn, and I'm pretty excited for the fact that, we got to talk about talking.
Yeah. Been lovely chatting. And thanks to National Young Writers Festival for organising.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone for coming. Be sure to check out the rest of the Younger Young Writers program. I believe there's a Poetry 101 session later this afternoon at 5. I'm bad at that. But also check out the Hachette Australia Young Writers prize announcement, which will be happening tonight. That's where a lot of young writers who are doing really cool stuff are getting to read their work out for the festival, and some of them are winners. I mean, they're all winners. That sounded bad. Oh, they're all winners, but some will win the prize aspect of that. And there's a lot of other really fabulous events going on with this entire festival. Check out the full program and get writing and listening.
Cool. Bye. Bye, Jess.
Bye.